Imagine this for a moment. You are standing on a platform long after midnight. The air is cold, sharper than it should be for the season. Your footsteps echo too loudly, as if the station itself were hollow, stretching into an emptiness you can't quite see. That night, I thought I was simply catching a late ride home. Nothing more. A missed bus, a restless evening, the kind of decision that feels small at the time, but somehow grows larger with every step you take. I wasn't supposed to be there. That station was nearly abandoned after midnight. Old, underfunded, with cracked tiles on the floor and walls that smelled faintly of mildew. Yet something had pulled me to the platform, almost as if a thread had been tied around my wrist, leading me there. And then, from somewhere far in the dark, I heard it. The whistle. It was long and hollow, almost mournful. Not like any ordinary train I'd heard before. This sound seemed to stretch, to carry inside my chest, vibrating in my ribs like the echo of some forgotten memory. It was not an invitation. It was a warning. And still, my heart leapt at the sound. The station clock read 12:07 a.m. Too late for most commuters. Too early for the morning shift. The silence was suffocating. Normally, even at night, you hear something. Cars outside, the murmur of people, a distant radio. But here, there was nothing. Just the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. And even those flickered like they were about to burn out. I remember pressing my hand against the metal railing and feeling how cold it was. Not night chill cold, but ice cold. Like the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. The platform smelled strange too. Not just oil and steel, but something else. Something like burned paper. Faint, but unmistakable. It made me cough, though the air looked clear. A vending machine stood at the far end, its neon glow buzzing and twitching. I stared at it for too long, because for a moment, I thought I saw a reflection in its glass. Someone standing directly behind me. But when I spun around, there was no one. Just the empty platform, stretching on in silence. I wasn't sure why I even walked up to the old ticket booth. Maybe habit, maybe the desire to see another living soul. The booth's glass was cloudy, streaked with years of neglect. But behind it, I swear, there was a man. His shoulders were hunched, his cap pulled low, his face lost in shadow. I hesitated, then asked, "Midnight service?" He lifted his head slowly. His eyes, when they met mine, were pale. Not just light-colored, but unnatural, but pale, in a way that made me think of milk diluted with water. Lifeless. "One ticket," he whispered. His lips barely moved. The sound of his voice didn't echo like normal speech. It crawled into my ear directly, like static from an old radio. He slid a slip of paper across the counter. When my fingers touched it, a sharp sting of static burned my skin. I blinked, startled, and when my eyes opened again, the booth was empty. The man was gone. I stood there alone. Clutching a ticket, stamped only with the words, "Midnight train, one way." A speaker crackled above me. I braced myself for an announcement. Instead, what spilled out was whispers. Layered voices, dozens, no, hundreds of them, overlapping, tumbling over each other. Too fast to follow, but not meaningless. Some urgent, some almost singing. One voice rose above the others, distant, but clear enough to send shivers up my spine. All aboard. The ground trembled beneath me. Rails screeched with pressure as something massive pushed against the night. And then I saw it. The train. It emerged from the tunnel like a beast dragging itself into existence. Its carriages stretched impossibly long, vanishing into darkness. The lights inside flickered, some glowing faintly, others completely dead. No faces appeared behind the glass. No shifting silhouettes of commuters. Only emptiness. And yet, when the train slowed and the reflection caught me just right, I saw them. Shapes. Sitting. Waiting. Watching. Not solid. Not entirely visible. But there. The doors groaned as they opened. A breath of air poured out, stale and heavy, colder than the night. It smelled faintly of smoke. Not the sharp smoke of cigarettes, but something older, like charred wood, scorched fabric. The smell of a fire long extinguished, but never forgotten. I hesitated. My body screamed to turn away. But something deeper, something irrational, urged me forward. My fingers trembled around the ticket. It seemed to burn in my hand, as though the ink itself was alive. I stepped closer, and for a moment, I thought I heard footsteps inside. Light, quick, like someone rushing to find their seat. But when I leaned in, the sound vanished. Instead, I heard something else, a child's laughter, soft, playful, coming from the far carriage. I stood frozen at the edge of the door. Every instinct screamed, "Don't do this!" But that same strange pull, the invisible thread around my wrist, tugged me forward. I stepped inside. The instant my foot touched the floor of that train, the air shifted. The platform behind me grew distant, muffled, as if it no longer existed. The doors closed, and in the reflection of the glass, I saw the pale man again, the ticket clerk, or whatever he had been, standing just outside. He raised his hand in a slow, deliberate motion. Not a wave. Not a goodbye. A warning. And then the train lurched forward, dragging me into the night. Have you ever felt a presence beside you when no one was there? The kind that makes the tiny hairs along your arms lift before your mind can invent a reason. That was my first minute inside the carriage. The overhead lights hummed, pulsing in a rhythm that didn't match the sway of the train. I slid into a window seat, the vinyl cold through my coat, and felt the cushion give as if someone had just risen a second before I arrived. The seat beside me wore the shape of a passenger, a shallow dip, a crease, the faintest indentation pressed into the backrest. I told myself it was old foam, collapsed by years of use. Except the air there felt colder, distinct from the rest of the cabin, like a narrow column of a winter lingering in July. When I turned my head, I could see the thread ends on the fabric fluttering, as if breath ran over them. The window was clouded with the ghost of earlier rain, smears catching dim lights outside. My reflection floated in it, pale face, eyes wider than I wanted them to be. Behind my reflection, a darker oval hovered briefly, a suggestion of a shoulder leaning toward me. I blinked hard. Only me remained. The wheels clicked beneath us. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack, too fast at times, then too slow, like remembering a rhythm from long ago and failing to find it again. I heard a whisper, a grain against glass, and thought it was the wind slipping through the seals. Then the whisper formed a shape, a word that might have been late, or wait, or wait. My ticket rested on my knee. The ink looked freshly damp. There was a pocket on the back of the seat in front of me, the kind that usually holds a safety card or a crumpled flyer. Inside, my fingers found paper. Thin, greasy at the corners, folded twice. The fold lines were slick with age, as if many hands had made the same crease. I know I should have left it alone. But trains make you curious. The world is temporarily reduced to a corridor, and every scrap within it feels meant for you. On the paper, block letters scrawled too hard tore the surface. If you hear singing, do not answer. Underneath, in smaller handwriting, a softer confession. It doesn't stop when you close your ears. It moves to your bones. I refolded it, then noticed there were more. A brittle ticket stub with a date long faded. A napkin stained the color of weak tea with a message in blue ink. Seat 7B. Don't sit. She sits there. And as if to prove the point, the fibers of the napkin bulged where the pen dug in. Something crunched when I pressed deeper into the pocket. A tiny plastic bead, the kind sewn onto a child's bracelet, rolled onto my palm, pale blue. The hole through the middle was clogged with lint. I set it on the window ledge and felt immediately guilty, as if I had disturbed a shrine. Farther down the car, someone or something shifted. The sound felt wrong for the number of visible bodies. I counted 4 people, spread out, yet the floor complained with the weight of many more feet, a sigh the planks couldn't hide. The old notes in my hand trembled without wind. I tucked them carefully into my coat and tried to breathe evenly. Across the aisle sat a woman in a dark coat, collar turned up, a scarf braided neatly around her throat. She kept her eyes on the window, seeing only her own reflection. I don't know why I whispered to her. It felt like breaking a rule I hadn't been told. "Excuse me," I said, my voice much too loud in the hush. "Do you know where this train is headed?" She didn't turn, but her lips parted. "Home," she said. Her breath fogged the glass in a round bloom. "Always home." "Which station?" I asked. The bloom on the glass lingered longer than it should have. "Whichever has the lights on," she said. "Whichever calls." I might have laughed. Nerves. She finally looked at me, and I saw how strange her eyes were. Not in color, but in focus. She seemed to be looking a few inches behind my face, like she had learned the habit of not quite seeing people. Her hands lay flat on her lap, paper-thin skin, a gold ring that seemed too new for the rest of her. "Shouldn't talk," she said, almost tenderly. "It makes him notice." "Who?" I asked, before I could stop myself. "The man who counts," she murmured. "He doesn't like the numbers to change." She turned her face back to the window, and I saw then that the scarf around her neck wasn't braided cloth at all, but a line of stitches, crossed neatly, the thread a darker shade than the skin it held. When I glanced away and back, the scarf was only wool again. My mind was already making bargains with reality. The seat diagonally ahead of me stood empty. On the cushion, a phone lay face down, its cracked case flecked with glitter. It might have been abandoned, or dropped, or placed carefully as an offering. The screen lit when the train hit a seam in the rail, jittering to life with a notification. One unsent voice note. My thumb hovered a millimeter above. Touching was a betrayal. Touching was inevitable. I tapped it. The audio began with breath, too close to the mic. A rushing cavern, then a whisper. A girl's voice, young enough that fear still sounded like wonder. If you find this, don't try to help me. I got on at 00012. There was nobody. Then there were lots of nobodies. Like when you look at a crowd through fog. The conductor, he asked for my ticket, but he didn't look at me. He looked at the empty bit next to me, like it was full. He punched a hole, and I felt it go through my wrist, like ice water. The track snapped into static for a heartbeat. When it cleared, her voice came back smaller. I can smell smoke, but I can't see fire. The windows show stations I don't know. One had a name like a cough. I tried to text Mom, but the message turned into something else before it sent. If they're singing, don't answer. Even if it says your name in your voice, especially then. Silence. Then, too loud, the sound of a metal door sliding open. And the voice. Her voice again, but misaligned, delayed by a second. Hello? The clip ended in a dry, deliberate click, as if a stranger's thumb had pressed stop. The phone's battery icon showed 1%. It dimmed to black. I set it back where I found it and wiped my fingers on my coat, though nothing had marked them that I could see. The aisle light at the far end flickered out, and I felt the carriage inhale. The presence beside me deepened, like someone had leaned close enough that the temperature shifted around the outline of a body. Then I heard the scrape of a hole punch, the sharp bite of metal on paper. I recognized that sound from 100 normal journeys. Familiarity is how anomalies get in. He arrived without footsteps. One instant the aisle was empty, the next. A man stood there in a uniform, the color of old night, the seams shiny with wear. His hat brim hid his eyes. In his gloved hand, the punch glinted, tiny jaws ready. He didn't meet my gaze. He held out his other hand, palm up, patient. "Tickets, please," he said, and the phrase floated oddly, as if recorded on tape and played back a little slow. I gave him mine. My fingers shook. He didn't touch the paper, not directly. He hovered the punch over it, and the ink on the words "one way" beaded like liquid mercury. There was an intimacy to the moment I didn't want, a sense of someone reading not the ticket, but the thin patterns of warmth across my skin. He brought down the punch. A neat circle fell out and struck my knee. Cold rushed through the pinprick hole, as if the train had threaded me, pulled me onto its string. The conductor paused, head cocked toward the empty seat at my side. "And yours," he said politely to no one. The punch bit empty air and still made a hole. I swallowed. "Where does this train go?" I asked. "What's the last stop?" He moved the ticket back toward me, and I glimpsed his face under the brim. Normal, except too still, like a photograph. A ticking came from somewhere deep in him. Not mechanical exactly, but steady. "Last stops are a comfort other lines can afford," he said, and his smile didn't trouble his cheeks. "We service destinations that are not punctual." Who rides with you? I asked. My voice sounded thin. He considered the question, or acted like he did. Uncollected debts. He said finally. Lost property. Unfinished songs. He turned his head to the seat beside me, a column of cold, and lifted his chin as if recognizing someone. "Ma'am," he said to the emptiness. The hat dipped. When I looked down, the hole in my ticket had rhymed itself with frost. I blinked, and he was gone. No footsteps away, no door, no rustle of fabric, just empty aisle and the lingering scent of steam that had never been water. The train glided through a tunnel so long that the darkness outside became solid, like we were pinned inside the belly of something vast. That's when I heard it, faint at first, folded into the hum of the lights, a melody. 4 notes up, 3 notes down, the kind of tune adults hum to soothe themselves when a child won't stop crying. I told myself it was a memory. It wasn't. The sound came from the small compartment at the carriage end, door slightly ajar, a stain like dry tea along the edge. The window in the door showed only my warped reflection until, not my reflection, a smaller shape overlapped it for a breath. Round head, fine hair, the silhouette of a bow. I stood. The seat sighed, relieved to be rid of me, or disappointed. I couldn't tell which. As I moved down the aisle, each overhead light woke just before I reached it and died as soon as I passed, like a row of watchful eyes giving up. The closer I drew to the compartment, the stronger the smell became. Not rot, not urine, something gentler, more intimate. Warm milk, talc, the ghost of orange peel in December. I had to press my palm to the door to keep it from drifting open on a draft. Inside, the bench was empty. A small knitted mitten lay in the corner, pink, gone to gray with time. On the floor, a circle of scuffed marks, as if small shoes had turned and turned and turned, practicing a dance no one had taught. The lullaby continued, soft and, this was worse, cheerful. I realized it came not from a mouth, but from the metal itself. The carriage was singing to itself. Old vibrations. The singing stopped. The silence had weight. Then a breath fogged the glass on the door from the inside. But the door was already open, and I was standing there, and the fog wrote something that wasn't a word, the shape of a hand. Small fingers, 5 ovals pressed against the pane. I put my hand to it because that is what you do. You mirror the gesture of the absent. And cold shot up my wrist like a thread yanked tight. A voice that was not a child's, and not an adult's, and not a voice at all, whispered from the seam of the wall. "Don't say my name." The words were in my ear and under my breastbones simultaneously. "I don't know your name," I said truthfully. My mouth felt too dry to form syllables. "Good," it said. "Keep it that way." I stood there a long time, or a moment. Time is a hallway that doubles back on itself here. When the singing resumed, it was further away. "Perhaps in the next carriage," perhaps right behind my left eye. Back in my seat, I found a man sitting across from me who had not been there before. He wore a suit cut in a style my grandmother would have recognized, the fabric polished at elbows and knees. He held a newspaper folded in half. The masthead was smudged by wet. The date, where I expected it, seemed to ripple. He smiled politely, the way strangers in quiet cars do. "Do you know when we reach?" I hesitated. The name of my station felt thin, a paper label pasted on a jar that had been emptied long ago. "Do you know when we reach town?" "Depends," he said, and that old conjuring voice made depend feel like a coin trick. "On what?" "On whether you're real," he said, and tipped the newspaper as if it were a hat. No offense intended. I should have been irritated. Instead, the remark felt fair. "I think I am," I said. "Most days." "Then sooner," he said. "Reals disembark more quickly. Fictions like to ride the long loops." He smoothed a crease on the paper, as if soothing a pet. "I used to get off every night. Now, I like the rhythm." "What are you reading?" I asked, because questions were better than thinking. "Notices," he said. "Departures, arrivals." He turned the page, and I saw it wasn't text at all, but thin white columns of nothing. Spaces where words had been once. The headlines? A tremor ran through the carriage. The man glanced up, almost eagerly, and then his expression softened, the way people's faces soften when they hear a name they love spoken in a crowd. He folded the newspaper with care and set it on the seat. The cushion didn't indent. He stood, but I heard no sound of shoes on floor. "My stop," he said. "There's no station," I protested, because there wasn't, just wall. "There is if you've been looking too long," he said, and stepped into the aisle. For half a heartbeat, his outline thinned until I could see the armrest through him. A trick of light, a trick of belief. He bowed slightly to the empty space by my side. "Ma'am." Then he moved past, and as he passed, the smell of wet leaves and iron followed. The perfume of autumn stations where people waited, with paper cups and red noses. The perfume of years. I looked at the newspaper he had left. The date had settled now, as if deciding. He'd read a year I did not want to say out loud. The paper turned to damp ash between my fingers and left my palms clean. Signed. The speaker above our heads crackled again. I braced for hiss, for the cat's cradle of whispers. Instead, a voice spoke in the flat, official tones of recorded announcements. "Next stop," it began, and the word that followed made the back of my neck prickle. It was my name. Not the station, not a town. My name, said bright and clear, as if a childhood teacher were calling roll. I wasn't the only one who heard it. The woman in the dark coat lifted her chin without looking away from the glass. The presence at my side, the column of cold, tightened. The intercom repeated the announcement, adding a detail that wasn't mine, but almost was. A nursery nickname only 3 people had ever used, and 2 of them were gone. "Wrong line," I said to the empty aisle, my voice trembling with bravado I did not own. "You have the wrong line." The intercom clicked like someone deciding whether or not to argue. Then, lightly, it tried again. "Next stop, home." The last word stretched softly in that broken tape way, becoming a sound halfway between welcome and warning. The train slowed, not with a jerk of brakes, but with the long exhale of intention. Outside the window, darkness parted to reveal a platform bright with a kind of light that wasn't electricity. Shapes stood there, still as figures in an old photograph. Some faced us, some faced away. None cast shadows. On the wall behind them, the station name was painted, but the paint had been peeled off letter by letter. Only the clean under rectangle remained, whiter than the surrounding grime. I stayed in my seat. I did not stand. The presence beside me leaned. The indentation deepened, and for the first time, I felt the brush of fabric against my arm, an almost frictionless slide, like wet silk. "Don't," I whispered. The train gathered itself and moved on, the lights in the carriage brightened by a fraction, just enough to reveal the wrongness of the upholstery. 2 seats ahead, the fabric was newer, a slightly different blue, as if replaced after something had soaked into the old. The pattern of dots didn't match the rest. I opened my hands and found I had been counting without knowing, thumb tapping each finger, 1 through 4, over and over. The woman across the aisle had said there was a man who counts. I thought of him as a fable, a mild superstition to pass long miles. But when the doors at the far end slid open by themselves, I heard a voice as precise as a ledger. 43, it said. 44. The numbers were not how many of us were visible. They were more. He did not appear. Perhaps that was his point. Still, the numbers moved closer, pacing the aisle in the air. 45, the voice said beside my shoulder, satisfied. The cold column rested its weight against me like a cat, making itself comfortable. And on instinct, I shifted to give it space. The kindness of that gesture made me feel sick. "Who are you?" I asked it very softly, not expecting an answer. "Miscounted," it said, a breath that formed syllables without lungs. The word reached the inside of my left ear only. Left behind. "What's your name?" The question slid out, treacherous. Silence took the car, brief but absolute, a blackout of sound. Then the presence withdrew, as if bored with me, as if I'd made a faux pas. The number voice at the end of the carriage announced triumphantly, 46. I didn't turn to see if something invisible had boarded. The lullaby found me again, this time as a vibration through the seat rather than a sound through air. It traveled up my spine like an elevator, softening me, loosening my hands, making me want to close my eyes. The phone on the empty cushion ahead lit up without power, displaying a caller ID that spelled my name backward, each letter mirrored. The answer button pulsed. I pressed my knuckles to my teeth. It was such a small request to touch a screen, to let a voice arrive. I thought of the note in my pocket. If you hear singing, do not answer. The problem is, we are all built to answer. It's humility, or curiosity, or hunger. I don't know. The absence of it feels like rudeness. The presence of it feels like a door opening in your chest. The button brightened. The lullaby trembled on the down note and waited, a held breath. The intercom clicked as if clearing a throat. Somewhere very far away or very near, a punch clicked softly. The neat jaws biting air. I didn't touch the phone. Instead, I slid my ticket between my palms and squeezed until the hole pressed a perfect circle into my skin. The cold of it steadied me. "Not tonight," I whispered, and the carriage, or the thing inside it, or the line itself seemed to register the refusal. The singing broke on a wrong note, like a spoon dropped on tile. From down the car, the counting voice sighed. 45, it corrected, disappointed. The train sped up. I stood to walk, because the only way to survive uncertainty is to give your body a task. The doors at the carriage end slid aside for me without complaint. The corridor beyond was longer than it should have been. A folding of space, an accordion of doors. Each window showed a different version of the night. In one, a forest shoulder to shoulder with the track, needles black and glossy. In another, water rushing so close you could dip your hand and lose it. In a third, nothing at all. The pure velvet of a tunnel without an exit. Halfway down, the singing resumed in a different key, and something small ran across the floor where I couldn't see, skittering delicately, like buttons with legs. I stopped at a door marked 7, considered the napkin's warning in my pocket, and opened it anyway. The compartment inside was empty. That was worse than any face could have been. On the opposite seat, someone had left a coat the color of smoke. I picked it up without thinking and felt heat pooled in the shoulders, like a recently extinguished body. I put the coat back carefully, like laying a blanket on a sleeping child. When I reached for the next door, the handle turned on its own and a wind came through that smelled firmly of outdoors. Wet rock, iron, the green acid of crushed stems. We were moving too fast for there to be such a draft. I closed the door gently, and the wind continued from a place that was no longer behind it. I realized then that the train wasn't only carrying passengers. It was carrying weather. It was carrying time. It was carrying all the leftover breaths people hadn't used when they needed them. The corridor ended in a small vestibule where the coupling between cars shuddered and sang. Through a slit in the seal, another rhythm beat. Ketang, ketang, counting down to something I did not understand yet. The next carriage stood waiting. The sign above its door flickered between two names, observation and lost. I reached for the handle. Behind me, from the car I'd come through, the intercom spoke very gently, the way a kind stranger might call to a child leaning too far over a balcony. Please, remain seated. We will be experiencing adjustments. I looked back down the corridor I had just walked. It seemed longer now. The seats were emptier. The newspaper on the cushion had disappeared. The coat lay neatly folded, though I had not folded it. The presents beside my original seat had moved or multiplied. The cold bled in a braided line along the floor, like a draft made visible. I opened the door to the next carriage anyway. The midnight train rattled forward, carrying me deeper into the unknown. For a time, the ride almost felt ordinary. The steady rhythm of the wheels clacking against the tracks, the faint flicker of the overhead lights, the sway of the carriages. It was all strangely hypnotic. But then I noticed something. The length of the train. When I had boarded, it had seemed endless. A snake of iron stretching into the shadows. But now, as I walked down the aisle, it felt shorter. I paused and glanced behind me. Only 3 carriages stretched back, dimly lit and empty. Hadn't there been more? I I was sure of it. Dozens, maybe even hundreds. Enough to fade into infinity. And yet, as I stood there, I heard a loud metallic clang, like a coupling being unlocked. The sound rippled through the carriage. The floor trembled beneath my boots. And then, silence. I turned and pressed my face against the window. The last carriage, just a moment ago attached to this one, was gone. Vanished. No screeching brakes, no fading taillights, no wreckage along the rails. One moment it existed, the next it did not. It was as if the train itself had shed its skin. I wasn't alone anymore. When I turned, I saw her. An older woman seated halfway down the aisle. She hadn't been there before. Her presence was sudden, unsettling, as though she had materialized out of the flicker of the lights. She wore a heavy coat, buttoned to the throat, and a small hat that sat crookedly on her silver hair. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, gloved, unmoving. But her eyes were fixed on me. "Did you see it?" she asked in a low, steady voice. I swallowed. "See what?" Her lips twitched, almost into a smile, but not quite. The carriage that isn't there anymore. I felt my pulse quicken. "You saw it too?" "I've seen it many times." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They always disappear. The train feeds on itself, sometimes one by one, sometimes in clusters. And when they vanish..." She stopped. Her face tightened as though she regretted saying anything at all. "When they vanish," she finally continued, "they don't just disappear. They go somewhere." I wanted to ask more, but before I could, a jolt ran through the train. The lights flickered violently, and in that stuttering darkness, the woman's seat was empty. She was gone. Determined not to lose my grip on reality, I moved toward the connecting door. Maybe I could prove this was all some strange dream, that the train was whole and I was imagining things. I pushed through into the next carriage and immediately froze. The space was wrong. The floor tilted at an angle, as though the train were climbing a hill, but the windows showed only flat landscape rushing by. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, so tall it seemed to vanish into fog. And the seats? Oh God, the seats. They weren't in neat rows anymore. They spiraled in a circle around me, each one facing inward, as though I were standing in the center of some strange ritual. And though most were empty, a few held passengers. Their heads were bowed, faces hidden in shadow, not moving, not breathing. But there was a heaviness to them, like statues carved from grief. I took one trembling step forward, and instantly, every head snapped up in unison. Their eyes were gone. Hollow sockets stared at me, black as coal, unending as tunnels. And then, without a sound, they were gone. Seats empty, space ordinary again. Had I imagined it, or had the carriage simply shifted back? I lost track of time. Minutes stretched like hours, or maybe hours shrank into seconds. I couldn't tell anymore. The train wasn't just moving forward, it was bending reality, stretching it like glass about to shatter. I realized I had walked this same carriage before, twice, 3 times. Each time it was slightly different. A missing row of seats, a corridor longer than it should be, windows showing landscapes that didn't exist. At one point, I passed a young man sitting by the window, staring out at the black night. He was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, tweed suit, polished shoes, a thin scarf around his neck. He didn't look at me, didn't blink. I circled the carriage once more, and when I came back, he was still there. But this time, the scarf was blood-stained, crimson, soaking down his shirt. The third time I passed, the window beside him was shattered, cold wind rushing in, and his body was gone. Only the scarf remained, draped across the seat. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was still warm. The sound of footsteps drew my attention. Heavy, deliberate, approaching from the far end of the carriage. And then he appeared, the conductor. Tall, thin, dressed in a crisp uniform that seemed too pristine for a train this decayed. His cap shadowed most of his face, but his jawline was sharp, his expression unreadable. "Ticket, miss," he said, voice smooth and calm. I handed it over, barely breathing. He studied it with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then, slowly, he looked up. For the first time, I saw his eyes, empty, pale, glassy, just like the man at the booth. "You're not supposed to be here," he murmured. And before I could reply, before I could demand an answer, his body flickered, like a candle flame sputtering in the wind, and he vanished. The ticket was still in my hand, but now the ink had changed. No longer did it read one way. It now said, "Return pending." The rattling grew louder, the walls trembling around me. I ran to the window, desperate for some proof of reality. What I saw nearly stopped my heart. The train was shrinking. Carriage after carriage faded into the night, dissolving like mist. One moment they were solid, the next they unraveled into dust. And with each vanished carriage, the air inside grew colder. I could hear whispers now, swirling around me like wind through broken glass. Some pleaded, some wept, some laughed in cruel, mocking tones. The train wasn't just losing pieces of itself, it was consuming them, feeding on them. And with a sickening realization, I understood. One day, it would come for my carriage too. I sat down, trembling, clutching the blood-stained scarf. The lights flickered overhead. The whispers grew softer, like a lullaby. I thought of the old woman's words. They go somewhere. But where? To another world? Another time? Or into the darkness itself, swallowed forever? I wanted to know, desperately. But some truths might be worse than ignorance. Because the midnight train didn't just carry passengers, it collected them. And maybe, just maybe, I was already one of them. The train slowed, though I could not feel the change in speed. Time itself seemed to resist, bending around the wheel's rhythm. Then came a sound, soft, yet unbearable, like the wind across a canyon, yet too human. A mournful wail, deep and hollow, not from the present, but from centuries past. My stomach turned. I recognized it immediately. It was the sound of loss. 1,000 moments of grief, compressed into one note, curling like smoke through the carriages. I pressed my palms to my ears. It entered anyway. The wail whispered names. Children, parents, strangers whose lives ended on tracks, in fires, in accidents long forgotten. Each name was an echo, each echo a memory trapped. I felt tears run down my cheeks, but the air around me was dry, impossibly dry, and the train smelled of burnt wood and iron. The window beside me fogged over, and for a heartbeat, I saw a station long closed, platforms cracked, signs peeling. Crescent Junction, closed, 1892. Figures moved there, frozen, then vanished into smoke. The train outside the window didn't exist anymore. It had become a corridor between times, a vessel for the forgotten. I wandered the aisles, heart hammering. On each seat, there were remnants, faded photographs, letters yellowed with age, a locket, a child's toy still warm to the touch. I lifted one locket, a tiny portrait of a girl smiling, hair braided, eyes alive. When I looked again, the image was gone. Only the empty metal remained. I realized the train was more than a route through darkness. It was a collection. Every carriage carried fragments of lives lost or unfinished. And when I passed the next car, a newspaper lay unfolded on a seat. Its headlines spoke of disasters I had only read about. Collisions, derailments, missing trains. And then the dates warped before my eyes. Years flickering like dying lights. I crouched, breathing shallow, and noticed scratches in the floorboards. Tiny footprints, some human, some wrong. They ran toward the walls, vanished, ran again. I traced them with my fingers, but the floor was smooth beneath. My mind screamed. This place bends reality. Point. I came upon a compartment marked observation, filled with books, papers, and dusty equipment. A journal lay open, its handwriting meticulous, shaky at times, describing encounters with the midnight train. The carriages shift, they appear and disappear. Time behaves differently inside. Witnesses report children singing, figures standing where no one exists, and a conductor who is always present, yet never touches the rails. Those who ride feel drawn to continue. Many never disembark. I touched the pages. The ink burned my fingertips, a reminder. Knowledge here comes at a price. As I read, I realized the investigator had been aboard decades ago, trapped in loops like me, leaving records in vain for those who followed. A voice whispered behind me, "Curiosity is the ticket." I spun, but no one was there. Only shadows stretching across the walls, brushing against the ceiling, sliding along the floor. I clutched my ticket and shivered. I was being tested, counted, observed. The train groaned and the lights dimmed. Outside, the landscape dissolved into nothingness. The windows reflected only the carriage interior, multiplied infinitely. The sense of being watched intensified. Every movement created echoes. Every breath caused ripples. A child's lullaby floated again, soft, teasing, coaxing me forward. I saw tiny hands pressed against glass, reaching from a world that was not mine. I wanted to touch them, but knew better. To reach was to invite. I walked the corridor, each step a heartbeat. Carriages behind vanished. In front stretched endlessly. The train no longer seemed linear. It folded, looped, existed outside ordinary geography. I realized then the truth. I was no longer on a train through the night. I was on a train through eternity. He appeared again, the conductor. Tall, uniform immaculate, pale eyes glinting. "You're close," he said. "Close to where the lines end and the echoes begin. Few reach this far." I clutched my ticket. "What happens next?" He tilted his head. "That depends on your courage. Some disembark, some remain, and some are collected." "Collected?" My voice trembled. "Like trapped?" "Trapped is a word from your world," he said. "Here, we call it purpose." His finger hovered over my shoulder. "Your stop is not on the map. No platform bears its name." I swallowed. Every instinct screamed to flee, but I knew it was pointless. The train bent reality around me. I could not escape the rails. The carriage in front opened to a vast hall of darkness, walls folding like paper. I stepped inside. The air smelled like winter and old ink. The wail of the past receded into whispers, murmuring secrets I did not yet comprehend. The floor beneath me glimmered faintly, a reflection of stars not seen by human eyes. I glimpsed shadows moving, shapes seated, standing, fading. They were passengers, not all alive, some never truly born, some waiting, some observing. A voice, not spoken aloud, touched my mind. "This is where we go when the world forgets us." I realized then the train's ultimate truth. It did not travel across geography. It traveled across existence itself, through memory, through loss, through time's cracks. Every passenger was here for reasons they might never understand. And the train itself was patient, eternal, waiting for those willing or unwitting enough to board. I stood in the vast darkness, ticket clutched in trembling hands. A chill swept through the carriage, stronger than any wind outside. I could hear breathing, mine, theirs, the train's. The conductor appeared beside me, his shadow stretching unnaturally long. "Will you step forward or return?" he asked. I thought of the platform, the familiar streets, the lights of the city, and then of the unknown, the unseen passengers, the vanished carriages, the histories, the whispers, the lullabies. I made my choice. Forward. As the train accelerated into the void, the conductor's voice followed me. Soft, persuasive, almost intimate. "Next time you hear that whistle in the dead of night, will you dare to look for the midnight train?" And in that moment, I understood. The journey is never truly over. It waits for the curious, the brave, the lost. I could feel the train stretching, folding, devouring distances, taking me onward to destinations unseen. And for the first time, I wondered not if I would arrive, but who or what I might meet when I did. The shadows moved closer, the lullaby whispered, and the train carried me into eternity.